Hi, everybody. Welcome to part 3 of our GMP certification webcast. My name is Brett McMillen. I'm the Cannabis and Hemp Division Manager for the Perry Johnson Companies. We are a global certification body for all major food safety standards, and we also do quite a bit of certification for GMP in the cannabis and hemp space. Part 3 this week is kind of a recap of the year, and I'm really excited to have Kim Stuck on board from Allay Consulting and Caleb King from Tryptomics Lab in Colorado. Kim, you want to just say hi and tell everybody about Allay Consulting? I know we've spoken before, and a lot of people are probably familiar with you in the industry, but for those that are tuning in that aren't familiar, let's hear about Kim and Allay.
Yeah, so hi everybody. Thank you for having me, Brett. So Allay Consulting is a compliance consulting firm that really deals with consumer safety and worker safety. So our bread and butter right now is GMP certification, and obviously Perry Johnson is one of the accredited certifying bodies that we work with the most. We essentially are the consultants that come in and help you prepare for the actual certification audit. So we come in, we do a mock audit, we help you find which accredited certifying body you want to use, we walk you through the process, we create all of your documents, SOPs and logs, we train all your staff, we do another audit, and then we're also there, a mock audit before the actual certification audit takes place, and then we can also be there for the certification audit. And then we also help you write the corrective action plan. So that's really, it's a lot in a short amount of time to explain. It's really complicated, obviously, the whole process, but we kind of have it down to an art. And especially when using Perry Johnson, I mean, we know your regulations like the back of our hand at this point because we've worked with you so many times. And that's Allay Consulting, and that's kind of what we do. We also do OSHA as well. A lot of times when we're doing GMP, people are like, hey, just do our OSHA stuff as well, because you know, rescheduling is coming, federal legalization is coming, and anybody, you know, on the hemp side or the THC cannabis side really should be preparing in some way, because it's going to be really rough if they're not. So so that's what we do. It's pretty awesome. And I started in the industry in 2014 as a regulator, a cannabis regulator in Denver. So that's how I kind of got into the industry and have helped write a lot of regulations. And I'm also on the ASTM D37 Cannabis Standards Committee as well. So I write a lot of standards, which is great. A lot of boring stuff. Really.
Well, you know, keeping things safe isn't boring. Speaking of keeping things safe and testing and such, Caleb, you want to introduce your company and give us a little background?
Yeah, absolutely. Testing is never boring, or any type of compliance is never boring. So I think it's the most entertaining thing. And I've been in the industry now 6 years, started in cannabis and hemp, and we'll touch on this a little bit later in today's discussion, but also moved into psychedelics and the testing of psychedelic medicines that are coming to the marketplaces. Tryptomics is a natural product testing laboratory and biotechnology company here in Colorado, where we focus on providing basically potency and safety and efficacy data for our clients, as well as kind of diving into some of the research for our clients as well about unique kind of compounds that may be present, or potential contaminants that could be present in either supplements or in the natural products that are being given to the ultimate consumer. So really it's about giving our clients the data to make sound decisions, not only on the quality side, making quality products, but also making decisions, or making data available to our clients that ultimately end up consuming these supplements or natural products themselves. So thanks for having us here, Brett, and look forward to today's discussion.
Yeah, so let's just dive right into it. Kim, I saw you at MJ Biz in Las Vegas, which, you know, great event. A lot of people that are tuning in probably have been to it. If you haven't, I highly recommend going. It's a huge event, and say what you will about Las Vegas and you know, all that malarkey. It still is a great gathering of a lot of different companies, a lot of different people, and it's a great way to touch base with a lot of clients and people in the industry and How was it for you this year, Kim, compared to other years? What did you think? Did you see anything cool, or what would you say?
Yeah, well, I didn't get to go last year, so this year I was like really excited to be there this year. I think the numbers were down from previous years, but not by much. Like I still felt like everyone I talked to was valuable. And then I ended up speaking at the conference as well. And I mean, that went really well because we did a whole panel on standardization and GMP. So I felt like I felt like the speakers were really good this year. I love that show. I feel like I made connections there. I got to see people I hadn't seen in years. And it reboots kind of like, it's a great end of year, like bang before, preparing for next year. So I was super happy to go. It was great to see you there, as always, and hang out at your booth and feel like one of the cool kids.
Well, so not everybody can be at the kids' table, Kim. But what I noticed was, and Caleb, I know we'll dive into this a little bit more, but I definitely noticed more of a mushroom presence. There was the kind of the psychedelics, and for any of you that haven't been there before, there is a separate symposium track, typically a day or two before, where you can pay extra and go to certain events and seminars, which I think were definitely well worth it. And I just saw, obviously there was a whole separate track on psilocybin and psychedelics and mental health and everything that encompasses. And it was a huge, huge increase from the year before. And I can only imagine what it's going to be like in, 2024. But, touching on that, one of the biggest things that we've seen as a certification body for doing GMP certification, and for anybody that's tuned in, this third part is more about what we're seeing in the industry with Kim and Caleb and how that relates to having a good manufacturing practices, system in place. And I'll just dive right into it with hemp. We've seen a lot of folks trying to get GMP certified for Delta 8 and what's happening in different states and things like that. Caleb, are you seeing, working with some of your customers and in the hemp industry, what's your take on what's going on with Delta 8 right now? I mean, scientifically, kind of what are you seeing, and where do you think that's going to go into 2024?
Yeah, Delta 8 is really the unique kind of cannabinoid and talk of the town in many states. It's interesting because of the patchwork of regulatory framework that exists in the United States, where Delta 8 is allowed in some states have totally banned it altogether. Others still are trying to make up decisions on how to fit it into the dispensary system of regulated cannabis and cannabis extracts. It also has this unique component to it where it's derived from CBD, so therefore it's part of the Hemp Act here in the United States, the agricultural bill. So there's a lot of legalities that are still trying to be figured out on that. And when it comes to the side of safety and testing for these products, Delta 8 tends to have a market around it that is either there's two components to it. Either people are really interested and want to test the heck out of their Delta 8, do the full compliance testing on it, make sure that they're following everything that cannabis regulations are following in some of the strictest states like California and Colorado. And then there's some others out there that try to bypass some of those regulations and try to get their products to market without the testing. And unfortunately, that ultimately hurts the end consumer who may be consuming residual solvents that are left over in the Delta 8 extracts or edibles, as well as just the potency not being what's claimed on the package. So there's a whole range of issues, and Delta 8 just kind of sits in this gray area, and you really don't know till you have a tested product to find out what's in it.
Kim, what are you seeing in Colorado with the Safe Harbor Act? Do you want to kind of tell people about that a bit that are tuning in and don't realize how that's kind of, I guess it's better than nothing, but it's sort of a unicorn type situation.
Yeah, I mean, and we have Delta 8 clients that are getting GMP certification in states that it is allowed, right? So some areas it's okay for people to get certification because it's, in a state that is, it's compliant for them to be there. In Colorado, they at first just outright banned everything, right? Like you can't do this. And there was a lot of pushback with that, right? There was a lot of people that were like, no, 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 this is different. It's on the hemp side. We really need to be able to allow this. And so the way that Colorado did it was like, okay, here's the deal. You can have these facilities that are making these products, but you cannot sell them within the state of Colorado. So many of, and they also are requiring, you know, certain standards as well, right? Making them, you know, follow CDPHE's rules, which is the state health department. And then I think they might even be requiring GMP in some instances, but I'm not sure about that. Are they, Brett? Yeah.
I believe in Colorado for the Safe Harbor Act that is required to have that type of a license, if you will.
Right.
And I think that's coming down the pipeline where you have to get a GMP certificate from a company that's accredited or legitimate, like Perry Johnson. And there are other certification bodies out there that, you know, can provide that type of a certificate. But, you know, for the folks tuning in about GMP certification, there are a lot of companies out there that can do a GMP audit for you and review things and issue a certificate, and that can still have value, but you want to deal with a company that's actually accredited, meaning somebody has come to us and audited our competency as a certification body to issue a certificate to you. And I think as long as states have those things in place, then it gives more legitimacy to that certificate and what's going on. And so there's other states out there like New York, I believe Illinois, Michigan,
Florida,
Florida, where GM, you know, that is in place.
Yeah. So as far as I know, that in Colorado they haven't quite started, you know, rolling all of this out, or you know what I mean. So there aren't a lot of Delta 8 companies that are like going for the certification quite yet, but they will need it. And they're allowed to sell like online to other states instead of like in a storefront in Colorado, which is really interesting way to do it. But as we were talking about earlier, it's better than nothing. It's better than just like shutting down a business and not allowing them to do it at all. So, but agree with you on the accredited certifying body. Our company doesn't even work with non-accredited certifiers because those certifications just don't really hold water when it comes to the government. So
exactly. And so part of that achieving the GMP certification is getting your testing done by qualified laboratory, seeing what those results are, making sure there's no residual solvents, heavy metals, things like that. And then obviously having a certificate of analysis for that, so you can show that to your clients and have that QR code or what have you to know that, or even just if you're doing the extraction and shipping out of state, that your clients know that it's a clean product. Caleb, when you're helping clients or getting samples sent in, what types of things are you seeing in the lab? How are you able to work with the clients? Is it more of a micro situation where there might be like a listeria or a salmonella, or are you seeing some pretty nasty stuff coming through the hemp, or what kind of things are you seeing in the trenches in the lab?
Sure. Yeah, and I would just add one more thing on, and not only is it the end consumer that might want to see a certificate of analysis, but even part of the GMP process and your own program that you have as a manufacturer, having these built-in checks using data from a trusted laboratory can really help you fine-tune the process, create good logs that just really make sure that your process is systematized. So the testing helps not only for the end consumer, but also the producer as well. Things that producers out there right now may have potentially in their hemp that's extracted and carried through to Delta 8 or some other cannabinoid right now. There's a few other these hemp-derived cannabinoids, HHC, hexahydrocannabinol, THCB. I mean, the list, the acronyms go on, and Delta 8 just is kind of that flagship cannabinoid from hemp. But what we've noticed so far is really the potency discrepancy in products that are out there. People are taking Delta 8 and putting them into, let's say, a gummy or some kind of edible form and packaging that. but what we've noticed is there's inhomogeneity in the actual edible itself. So one end of the chocolate bar, for example, may have a really high dose, and the other end of the chocolate bar may have a very low dose of that Delta-8 in it. So it's this hodgepodge of even within the process, that when people are making this, that the potency is not 100% uniform. The second thing that I think we've noticed as well is the presence of some of the solvents and pesticides. Because hemp is grown outdoors, or traditionally is grown outdoors, at least that's the way to manufacture at the large scale. There are indoor cultivators, but the major hemp that's grown outdoors for CBD, it's exposed to pesticides from the environment. That may not mean that they directly applied them, the farmer directly applied them to that crop, but it could have been from drift or from other applications from agricultural crops nearby. And that then makes it onto the hemp. That hemp goes through the process and the extraction process, and some of those pesticides get carried along for that ride through the extraction process and ends up in the final product. I would say then one other third thing that people should be concerned about Delta-8 is the residual solvents and potentially acids that are left over, strong acids that are left over. To convert CBD to these psychoactive forms that are made into products, they traditionally have to use, not always, but a lot of manufacturers use strong acids such as sulfuric acid, hydrochloric acid, and those can be pretty harmful to the body if that's ingested. So really making sure that your lab can test kind of the full panel of potential contaminants out there, ranging from solvents to pesticides, to even just the potency itself in an edible form.
That's awesome insight. That's why we have you here to hear that, because, you know, Delta, and I know we'll move on to some other subjects, but Delta-8 is it's some people out there that are tuning in. I'm not a PhD chemist. Some people would argue, you know, hey, we're making this in a clean way and we can back it up and it's a viable product. And to those folks, you know, I applaud you. But, you know, I've got kids in high school, and it's unbelievable how easy you can just go online and get 100 packages of gummies shipped to you, and all of a sudden they're at school, you know, and it's and that can happen with anything, but it's unbelievable how prevalent it is. But Kim, with, you know, our previous episodes, we just talked about the basics of GMP, having procedures and SOPs in place, and, you know, kind of the pillars of, you know, how are you dealing with your people, your premises, your products. And I wanted to ask you, when you come into a company, or you're coming in to help a company that's not having all these things in place, and it might be kind of a hodgepodge, what are some of the typical kind of hiccups or issues you see with companies that are trying to embrace a good, you know, GMP program? Some of the, in terms of procedures and getting the team on board, stuff like that.
Yeah, I mean, that's a really long list. Mainly
it's kind
because,
of a question, but yeah.
Right. Well, but you know, but it's a valid question. I think that what we're seeing mostly is that people think that they are GMP compliant and they don't know what GMPs really are. I can't even tell you how many times I'll talk to someone on the phone and they're like, yeah, we'll just do a mock audit, and I think we're going to pass with flying colors because we have everything in place. And then I get there and it is not compliant at all. They're like, oh yeah, we have all the SOPs we need. And I'm like, okay, great. And then we look for their SOPs, and either they can't find them because they have no idea where they are, or they're like handwritten and there's like 3 SOPs. You know, it's really interesting. It's really a lack of just knowledge of what GMP really looks like and what it actually takes. I think people, they call me and they say, hey, can we get this in 2 months or like 1 month? And I'm like, no, that doesn't happen. It takes months and months of work and implementing things to get things right. The fastest we've ever done it is like 4 months. It takes a lot of time and a lot of effort. We have to write a lot of SOPs and train the staff and do all of that. But I would say the first thing that we run into when we do our first mock audit, which is like the first step in anything, is floors, walls, and ceilings, where there is, you know, the floors, walls, and ceilings need to be smooth, easily cleanable. They have to be, you know, hard surfaces that aren't going to chip or crack or, you know, any of that. And sometimes that is a really big deal for people. They have these like concrete porous floors with no epoxy or, you know, whatever it may be. Physical facility issues are like the most expensive issues. So knowing what we have to change right away when it comes to that is really, really helpful to our clients. So we don't get down the line, we have all these SOPs written and then we go in and then we're like, oh, you need all new plumbing. You know, that's going to be a big bill. So we do that stuff right up front. We figure out if physical facility is even going to work. Keeping mops and dishwashing stations outside of production areas. That's a big one that we run into. Not having enough hand sinks, not having hot water in those hand sinks. That's always a really big deal too. So, you know, we run into a lot of different things that need to be fixed a lot of times. And then every once in a while, we'll walk into a facility and be like, oh, wow, this is beautiful. And this is perfect. But then they don't have any training in place, or they don't have the proper PPE for their, you know, all of their employees, or, you know, there's always something that can be improved on. But I think the physical facility things are always the big deal right away, because it's like, oh, your entire floor has to be redone, or you don't have drains in the correct areas, or these doors need to open this way and not this way, or, you know, whatever it might be. But yeah, there's a lot. GMP is very technical and very specific. And, you know, if you don't have it exactly the way that the accredited certifying body wants it, then, you know, you just kind of got to change it. But it is a point system. So, you know, if it's a few little things, you can still get certification, which is really nice.
Yeah, absolutely. And one of the, just to tie Caleb back into this, is, you know, one of the things that we come across on the front end, when you've probably had to deal with this or suggest, Kim, is also like the concept of an environmental monitoring plan, or EMP. And, you know, creating that relationship with the laboratory on the front end so that they can come in and maybe do a baseline set of swabs for, you know, E. coli, salmonella, things like that. Caleb, do you want to kind of tie into where that would come in with the process for good manufacturing practices? Because I'm a big fan of having the science on the front end, and knowing that, like, where Kim comes in and helps with making sure the physical part is there, the science lab part kind of ties into that with an EMP plan, and then getting into allergen management and having a good relationship with the lab. Do you want to kind of expound on that a bit with what you've seen?
Sure, yeah. And I'll probably lead off with a story here, just because story time is always great for these kind of things. Stories. So there were a few years ago, there was a cannabis client that I worked with that was looking, basically started off their process by gathering their equipment that they needed, their grow materials. They got all of their extraction equipment and everything in-house. Really got things on the cheap. They wanted to be very economical about it, which makes perfect sense. They went into a facility that had been used for previously in some of the bread making, or some other type of bakery type of a situation that occurred in there. And this facility, the unbeknownst to the growers and the extractors that were operating now in this facility, that their final product that they started making in their first couple of batches turned out to be contaminated with some serious pesticides in it, and some pesticides that were considered category 1 pesticides that basically you weren't allowed to detect any at all whatsoever. And unfortunately, this means that they lost at least, you know, hundreds of thousands of dollars of their initial product that they were going to market with. This is an unfortunate situation, but it really could have been prevented by doing some initial kind of monitoring up front, like you're talking about, Brett, where people go in and do the science on the front end that, yes, I will admit is a little bit more expensive and does require a little bit more capitalization on the front end for somebody that's, you know, getting ready for this. But it helped potentially, had they done this on the front end, it might have saved them on the back end and the loss of product and having to go in and remediate the entire facility, try to troubleshoot where the sources of contamination were, clean them out, and then start a whole nother round of production again. So it's a trade-off that you make as a manufacturer or somebody that's cultivating, where not doing the research and the science on the front end can actually cost you more in the long term. So that would be my recommendation, definitely, is work with a good sound lab that make sure that the lab is accredited in the areas that you need to have your final product tested for. So that may be microbials, maybe all the pesticides that are required. make sure that that lab really has good, sound kind of accreditation itself, so that you can trust that lab and work with them going forward and get consistent data from them. Because that is one of the things I hear the most about from the lab perspective, is the data being inconsistent. And there's a few reasons why that can be. That can be due to just the samples being inconsistent, or it could actually deal with the lab processes themselves and not having the proper certifications and checks and balances in the lab. So really knowing your lab and getting to trust them and their data they're producing for you is important.
Okay. Yeah, and me and Caleb were just talking yesterday about, we work with a lot of investors, right, that are buying facilities or, working in facilities, and environmental monitoring is like a really big deal, because if the facility itself has a pesticide issue, let's say myclobutanol was being used in that facility previous to them buying it, that can contaminate, but they didn't spray any of the pesticide, right? And so before you start growing things, going in, and I mean, I've swabbed and then just sent to Caleb's lab, just to see like, hey, what microbials are in this environment? What pesticides are in this environment? Is there heavy metals in this environment? There's like so many things that if you know from the beginning, that could save you so much time and headache down the line. So.
Absolutely. And you mentioned, Kim, the detail that's what's needed for a GMP certification. And, most legitimate certification bodies will have a checklist in place, like Perry Johnson does, that as a potential client of ours, or a client of yours, Caleb or Kim, is know what you're being certified to, know what the requirements are. And that's the big thing when I'm talking to folks that are coming on board to get GMP certified before they've even interviewed consultants like Allay or labs like with Caleb and Tryptomics, is understand what is required and be honest with yourself and your team and review the checklist and kind of have that gut check or that internal audit and know what your shortcomings are and know what you need to fix. It's certainly not impossible. And it's also, it's not necessarily a pass-fail scenario as much as, what the corrective actions are and how systemic they are and what you need to do to be a successful company, in this industry. And, speaking of kind of what we're going to see or what everyone's predictions are for 2024, I kind of wanted to not end it, but close it out with, let's have a little talk about mushrooms, because everybody's talking about mushrooms. We saw it at MJ Biz. It's coming up at dinner parties. Hey, bro, did you microdose? It's a serious thing. It really is out there for mental health. I believe in that. I've read and seen a lot of folks that are fully on board with this. And obviously we're out of Michigan, and Michigan doesn't have anything like this in place right now. But Kim, just to dive into it, Oregon already has a program, if you will, in place, and Colorado is quickly coming behind. Would you say Oregon and Colorado are kind of the two states at the forefront of psilocybin and mushrooms and kind of the legal world? Do you want to dive into that for a second?
Yeah, I mean, so Oregon has had a therapeutic program. It's been passed since 2020. So now it's in place. There are therapeutic facilities now that you can go to. You don't need a doctor to prescribe it to you. You can just show up. So it's almost like a recreational program, but it's therapeutic in the sense that you don't like pick up mushrooms and leave with them. You get your dose and then take it there with, some certified administrators is what they're called. And then you take it there under their supervision so that if anything goes wrong, you have someone there to take care of you, which is really interesting. And there's like different dosing that you can do. They do have a microdose but you have to go take that microdose and sit there for an hour to make sure you don't have a reaction or anything to it. And it's really interesting. But it's very, very different than the cannabis system, right? There is no like dispensaries on the street that you can go up and buy it from. And it's kind of sounding that Colorado is going to be doing a very similar thing. They kind of are looking, we've had a lot of Colorado regulators reaching out to Oregon to kind of learn like, hey, how did you guys write this? What did you guys do? That kind of thing, which is exactly what happened with cannabis. You know, we have to look at the other states that have it legalized and learn from them. So I'm glad they're doing that. But it is very different than cannabis, but it's, you know, it is, it's going to happen. And I feel like with the regulations that I've already seen written, their quality assurance is much higher priority for the government than it was in cannabis, which is kind of interesting.
Caleb, what do you want to kind of discuss what you're seeing in Colorado and really what, you know, what Caleb and I were talking about this the other day in terms of the science of, you know, with cannabis, you want to know, obviously the potency is such a big thing with dry labbing and fake potency results or inflated potency results relative to, you know, the pricing of wholesale going into a dispensary. But for people that are tuned into this that aren't, you know, necessarily familiar with it, what are the kind of things, obviously other than the potency, can you test and prove that a mushroom is in fact the family of mushroom that it's, you know, is it a lion's mane or what have you? And what are those things you're looking at scientifically versus cannabis? Because obviously you're not, I would think there's no residual solvents unless there's some extraction going on. And it's already a mold, so aspergillus and things like that may not come into play. But, you know, scientifically, what are you seeing out there that clients are doing to try and set their mushroom or their product apart from others and being able to back it up scientifically?
Sure, yeah. So the regulations are just in their infancy right now. So there's very little in terms of, you know, knowledge, background knowledge for regulators to formulate, you know, testing regulations, and Colorado and Oregon have certainly tried to take their first stabs at it. The critical things that we think is important to identify in some of these mushrooms is the potency. We're talking here about a substance that has many more contraindications with other medications potentially that people take than cannabis does. And also the dosage range of what is needed to achieve different effects, whether that be a microdose or something a little bit more spiritual or something that's a little bit more intense of an experience for people. That dosage range is that delta in that range is much smaller than it is for cannabis. You know, taking a 10% cannabis versus a 15% cannabis may be not noticeable to somebody, but taking a 1 milligram to 2 milligram of psilocybin to all the way up to, you know, 15 or 10 milligrams of that substance can really create a profound difference in the effects that people have. And also, like I said, interact with medications as well that people might be taking. So understanding the dosing and potency of these products is really critical. One thing we've noticed too is the importance to see that there's actually mushrooms in some of these products. Right now in the black market, we're noticing that people have, they're distributing mushroom chocolate bars that they're claiming they have mushrooms on them, but truly don't have any mushrooms in them at all. It's synthetic psychedelics that are laced in there. So there's really a need to strike down what are the potential synthetic varieties that people could add into their product to get a more effective dose to people and still bypass, you know, growing the mushrooms and extracting them or putting them directly in a product. So to do that, you can utilize some DNA techniques. We, of course, rely really strongly on the chemistry component of things, knowing what kind of chemical compounds are present in the mushrooms that may not be present in a synthetic product. And then, like I said, the DNA aspect of things, really detecting whether the DNA of Psilocybe cubensis or your lion's mane mushroom or your cordyceps is actually in that supplement or that final product is really important.
That's awesome. That is really good insight because it's just important for the consumer. And I think that, you know, mental health gets equated, I think, a lot with mushrooms right now versus a recreational field than what cannabis did, even though it was medical cannabis. You know, medical cannabis, I think, at least in my opinion, was more for, you know, pain control or some sort of a disease or some sort of a physical situation, if you will. And that mushrooms is coming on board with kind of more of a mental health angle to it and recreational. I mean, let's be honest. And But I think for people to be able to trust it as a product, you have to have it tested correctly and understand what you need to see and understand what should be on that label, like what you're referring to, Kim, with your clients and folks that are in the mushroom, industry, if you will, are you seeing more products that are just the actual raw mushrooms themselves being tested and put into a capsule, or do you see in years to come more of a recreational type flavor with gummies and things that are more of a edible type based than actual mushrooms themselves?
So we have a couple of clients out here that are growing and processing, and so there is a lot of the like capsule side. I think that for smaller doses and for that's just a little easier, right, for people to take. It's just like a pill. But we are also seeing like chocolate, people putting the actual mushrooms in chocolate, because the mushrooms do not taste very good. So a lot of people don't like that taste. And so, anything to kind of mask that, especially with like some higher doses, because if you're taking a handful of 10 pills, that's, because you can only get it so finely ground, that sometimes in like a chocolate form or a gummy or something like that is a little easier. So we've kind of seen both. And then, when it comes to, the raw, like fruiting body, I'm not seeing much of that. They're mainly taking it and putting it into something to make it an easier dose, right? Because they really want to make sure that they're dosing correctly. That's a really big deal, and like in this, because if you overdose somebody or underdose, you might not get the effects that you want. And each person's chemistry is different, so you kind of need to learn like what dose is the right dose for you, right? So it's a little more complicated than like, hey, here's 10 milligrams of THC, where psilocybin is more mental, like you said, and it affects people differently. Some people can have a really great experience, doing 2 milligrams, and some people have a great experience doing 1, and it just depends on like where their chemistry is at within their body. So I always, and in this, it's really great because in the therapeutic centers, they start you slow. They're not going to just like throw you in. And so it's kind of nice for people with their like first experience with this, if they've never done it and they want these really great benefits and they think that it would help, going in and having a professional be there with you to figure out what that dose is and all of that. It feels a lot safer than it used to when, you would buy a bag of mushrooms and go, I guess I'll just eat some of these and see what happens, and so I think it's really great for especially our older generations, because I think a lot of them still have that war on drugs mentality. They're afraid of drugs, they're afraid of these things, and being in more of that therapeutic, there's a lot of PTSD and things like that that can be taken care of, an OCD, and with these treatments, and it gives them an environment to be safe in, right? They're not just in somebody's basement like eating mushrooms like randomly. They're like they're talking to a professional and being walked through the process, and they're talking about science, and then they're dosing them low and seeing how it goes, right? And that I think is what one of the best things about this is. People who normally wouldn't go to this, go to psilocybin regularly, like wouldn't think to, now have that opportunity to be in kind of a safe space and do it the right way and actually get benefited from it.
And I'll just add, like Kim mentioned, it not only does somebody's body chemistry and the set and setting of the experience really matter for some of this, but also we're beginning to realize that different mushroom varieties have different chemical profiles that ultimately play into the effect that somebody is going to receive. So it's not just, we have this concern that it's starting to look like cannabis very quickly here in mushrooms, where people are just focused on psilocin and psilocybin. But there are a whole breadth of other compounds that are in this class called tryptamines that bind to serotonin receptors in the body. And these other types of chemicals in these mushrooms bind to those same receptors as well. So it's not just all about psilocin and psilocybin. And I hope that regulators and folks out there in the GMP space begin kind of exploring what's the minor components in my mushrooms that could be creating a major effect for somebody.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I agree, Caleb. That's a good point because, not all mushrooms are created equal, and it's not all about, psilocybin and having some sort of I guess you call it intoxicating effect, if you will. But there's also a lot of like what you're doing, Caleb, with, nutraceuticals and call it dietary supplements or the testing on that end. I've actually drank quite a bit of mushroom coffee just to kind of try it myself. And there's a certain brand out there that I'm not going to mention that is pretty popular, and I could really tell a difference drinking mushroom coffee after a week than traditional coffee in terms of energy level and kind of focus and starting your morning off like that. And if there's anybody that's tuning in that's questioning, mushrooms as a dietary supplement versus psilocybin or some sort of a trip, I'm a big believer. And one of my personal goals in 2024 is to understand that more and to incorporate that into a diet. Because, Eastern medicine has been doing this for quite a long time, and the United States seems to just be kind of, grasping the benefits of that. So, yeah, so in terms of, that's one of my goals for 2024. In terms of, what Perry Johnson is seeing out there, what we've seen in GMP audits and kind of wrapping things up here for 2024, a lot of our clients were excited to get on board. They definitely needed help with the science, with the testing portion of knowing their ingredients and having a certificate of analysis from a vetted laboratory. And I would say probably 7 out of 10 clients definitely need a consultant like Allay Consulting to at least, on the very least, come in and do a gap analysis or a gap audit. So if you're tuned in and you're thinking about getting GMP certified, know your checklist and be honest with yourself in terms of making the investment with folks that have been in the industry a while who can help you get to that benchmark a lot faster and, protect your investment. So I'm looking forward to the concept of GMP being embraced in more states and more companies coming on board, because ultimately we want to have clean product for our friends and family out there that are trying these things, and also for people that are, that are using CBD and cannabis and hemp and mushrooms, that the end products are something that's, clean and useful and safe versus something that you could get at a gas station or online that's a completely unknown product. So with that, Kim, Caleb, I'd like to offer you guys a chance at some, closing comments for what you're seeing, what you're thinking about coming into 2024 before we, wrap it up for the holidays. Kim, go ahead.
Yeah, I really, it's just, if you have a business in any of these spaces, in any plant medicine space, just think about the future, right? You want to do things now that will save you money and time later down the line, because eventually federal legalization is coming. The FDA will be involved, OSHA will be involved. And if you're not thinking about those things right now, it's quite possible that you won't be around when they do start knocking on doors. And so really our goal is just to get into as many companies as possible and get them prepared so that they don't get blindsided by the new regulations that they're going to have to abide by. And honestly, GMP certification is the next best thing to being regulated by the FDA.
Caleb?
And be prepared for the future. Like Kim's saying, is getting ready for that. Being prepared for the future is having data to do that. And that's what we can provide you at Tryptomics is really giving solid data that helps you make informed decisions, because the informed decisions not only will help you save money in the short term, but also in the long term as well. So definitely make good, sound decisions. Work with people up front, work with your auditors up front, work with consulting agencies up front, do all of your testing on the front end if you can. Prepare and budget for that, and be prepared to, yes, do some on the back end, but know that you can at least sleep a little better at night, knowing that you're probably going to pass on the back end had you followed your protocols and procedures and done all of the upfront data analysis.
Awesome. Well, Kim, Caleb, thank you so much for being on this call. You guys are a wealth of information, and we could have this conversation for another hour, but I wish you guys the best and merriest of Christmas and happy holidays and happy New Year to everybody. great holidays, and we'll wrap this up for the year and hit the ground running in 2024. So thanks, everybody. Have a great rest of your day.
Thank you. Have a great day.